Welcome to another episode of the Astro Witch podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Gemini season as well as the spooky topic of the bad houses. Don't be afraid though, I'm going to break it down in a way that makes total sense and has minimal fear-mongering. Each season, the sun moves into a new sign, and the sun, which represents our soul, our height of wisdom, our soul lessons, and even the height of fortune and fame, brings about incredibly important life lessons, but more along the lines of soul lessons. While Saturn teaches us those hard life lessons, the sun teaches us the things that our very soul wants us to know, learn, and explore. These are the transits of this upcoming week or so. So as you can see, we now have the sun squarely in Gemini. That's the major transit at this point in time. I think one important thing is that Gemini energy teaches us not only to accept ourselves, but also to accept others. Many people write Geminis off as two-faced. And that is because Geminis will naturally have a dual nature. This is for a few different reasons. Gemini is mutable, meaning that it is double-bodied or two-natured, just inherently. But also Mercury in and of itself is a neutral sign, or a neutral planet, I should say. It's the only of the planets that isn't assigned masculine or feminine. And so even that in and of itself, that Mercury can be masculine and feminine in different places, in different charts, and sometimes it's diurnal, and sometimes it's diurnal, sometimes it's nocturnal. It shows that Mercury itself has multiple facets. Because Mercury is grounded in Virgo and becomes more earthly, Virgo doesn't see as much of that dual nature, although it does still see some, it is still mutable. However, Gemini, being an airy, movable, masculine sign, does see a lot of that duality. And maybe in Virgo season we'll talk more about how Virgos should be seen more for duality, and how many Virgos, if not all, have a great sense of duality. But for now we're sticking to the star of the show, which is Gemini. So one of those Gemini season explorations, soul explorations, is to learn to accept every side of yourself, yes, but also to learn to accept and understand the sides of others around you. And the human nature, that each of us has a dual nature. I don't care if you have an only fixed sign chart. Every single human has something that they would say in front of one person and not in front of another. Every single person can be more shy around one group of people, more outgoing around another. Every single person has a public face and a private face, whether they know it or not. The difference is many Geminis will know it and they will use it. And I think that in and of itself can be one of the lessons of this month, is let yourself use that. Don't feel like it's something bad, something that you need to run away from or be ashamed of. I think another Gemini lesson is simply to have fun with expression and communication. Geminis are very light and playful. They're masters of communication while doing it in a way that isn't so bogged down and serious. So let yourself say silly things and talk about things that matter to you but that you worry other people won't care about. Don't look at communication as this big serious matter. Like, respect it, but also play around with it. Have a certain element of self-discovery and self-exploration. We are coming out of Taurus season, as we always do in Gemini season, and Taurus season was all about teaching us the beauty and patience. Gemini is very different. While it isn't saying be impatient, be rash, instead Gemini is saying be proactive rather than patient. Figure out which moves and actions you actually need to take, and allow for yourself to start making moves and actions towards those things. So those are some of my favorite Gemini lessons. Let me know what yours are in the comments. What do you feel like Gemini season has to teach you? And if you are a Gemini sun or any other Gemini placement, what wisdom do you have to share with the world? We do have Jupiter and Mercury still in Taurus together, although the sun has now left. So the planet of abundance working with the planet of money and banks. We may be able to see movement around abundance this week. While the sun is with Jupiter, it's more around kind of growing your soul's desires and expanding upon reaching the height of fortune. But focusing on our big picture goals and dreams doesn't always pay the bills. But now we have these planets together, and Mercury is concerned with paying the bills. And not only that, but we do have the sun in Gemini, which is Mercury ruled. So that proactive Gemini energy may be seen around your finances, where you can still have your eye on the prize and on the big dreams, but you can also be a little bit proactive and see action taken around you and even feeling guided to take action for yourself. Mars remains in Leo, Venus remains in Cancer for now, but is growing closer to Leo. The main characters of this week are Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo, but of course all fixed signs are still the main character with Jupiter in Gemini. The sun and Jupiter can no longer be seen, so some of what's happening around our fortune and our luck and our growth will be happening in the dark or could be happening in the dark. So it's better to do what you can, right? Like take the actions that are within your hands, take power and control when you can, but also trust that things are going on behind the scenes, even when they cannot be seen. The Sun and Saturn are now square, so we may be pushed to take action around our most brilliant and soul-led ideas. Or we may just give them more time to ruminate and soak them in and kind of be mindful of them. That's the main energy this week. No huge shifts other than that Sun in Gemini. But next week we'll be talking about a Venus shift. We'll be talking about some Mercury energy, and it'll be a good time. Now we dive into the teaching portion of this podcast, where we are going to talk about the bad houses. They are a facet of the houses that has kind of died out in modern astrology. It is incredibly rare for modern astrologers to talk about the bad or good houses, but traditionally that was one of the ways that the houses were categorized. If you're watching the video, I am now putting all of the houses and their traditional meanings up on the screen for you to see and so that we can learn together. So the first thing I want to say is that bad houses does not mean bad person. It does not even mean bad. Another word for the bad houses was unfortunate houses. And it should be noted that there are good houses and fortunate houses as well. So speaking on the bad houses does not create fear, does not say life is evil and bad and ugly. It just recognizes the inherent balance of good and bad, of easy and hard that is in our life. And the way I like to look at the bad houses and the good houses is not really bad or good. It's not about morality in this situation. It's about hard or easy. Anything in astrology that does not receive life is considered bad because it's considered hard. Life is considered to be good. That's why the first house, which rules life and the body and spirit, is considered to be the best of the good houses. And the bad houses do not receive any of that life or light from the first house. They are all in aversion to the first house. And you can see, look at that first house there, called the helm. On either side of it are the 12th and the 2nd house. When houses are next to each other, they cannot be seen. You can imagine a beam of light and it's just skipping over those two houses. And that's why those are considered to be unfortunate or hard houses, because they do not receive the support of the native, of the person who was born with this chart, or with the energy of this chart, the life of this chart, the beginning of this chart. And then you will see across from it, there's the 7th house. The 7th house is another good house. It's an angular house, and it receives light from the first house. But the houses right next to it, the 8th house and the 6th house, are also in aversion to the first house. That is why these houses are considered to be bad and unfortunate. Every other house in this chart can receive life from the first house. The third house is sextile with the first house, showing a friendly but weak connection. So the third house is good, but it is cadent and inactive. It is also ruled by the moon, which is sometimes considered to be benefic, sometimes not, sometimes it's neutral. So the third house, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. There's a little bit of nuance to it, but generally is a good but weak and inactive house. The fourth house and the 10th house are square with the first house. So they are good because they receive light and there is more activity due to it being a square. Now, would them being square with the first house be bad, you ask? Because square is generally seen as an aspect that is negative, but it would not because of the good nature of these houses. Just like if you have Jupiter and Venus square, that's not a bad thing. Those are two benefic squaring off. And it's not going to be bad, it's going to be action orientated. So when we have two good houses squaring off, two houses that both receive the light of the first house, it's not going to be negative. Now, aspects between those houses can be, but I'm just talking about the house connections. So those are good and with more activity due to it being a square. It brings in the positive nature of the square, which is active. The fifth house is trine with the first house, and it is succedent, so it is moving upwards. It is benefic ruled by Venus, so it is very good, but only with moderate activity. It receives life from the first house. It is ruled by a life-giving planet, but it still isn't the most active. The 11th house is sextile with the first and benefic ruled, so it's very good, but less activity, and perhaps even less activity than the 5th house. The 7th house is opposing, so it receives light and has a good amount of action and activity. The 9th house is trine with the first house, so it receives light and is beautifully connected, a little bit better than the 3rd house even, but still cadent and inactive or slow. Inactive and slow are not inherently bad. In fact, the 3rd house and the 9th house are the things that slow us down and take us away from hard work and instead get us to connect to ourselves and our soul and our spiritual journey. Now, the 2nd house cannot be seen by the 1st and has no rejoicing planet. It has no life from the 1st house, but it is still succedent and upward moving. It is the least bad of the bad houses because of that succedent nature. It supports the body and life, though it can still separate it, just like the things that we do for our livelihood can separate us from what we really want to be doing as our life direction. And just like our worries about finances can feel like life or death. That is why the 2nd house, while it is necessary, like all of the bad houses, is still unfortunate. The 6th house cannot be seen by the 1st and has a rejoicing Mars. Mars is the planet of war and aggression and injuries, and that is the planet that rejoices here. It does not receive light, and it is afflicted by anger, which makes it one of the worst houses. Of course, each of these houses can be transformed, which we will talk about a bit later. The 8th house cannot be seen by the 1st, and it has no rejoicing planet. It is succedent, so it is upward moving, and like the 2nd house, it supports certain things. It supports relationships by signifying a partner's money, and it can also signify things like investments and inheritance. But it also represents death and anxiety because of the lack of life that is there. So the 8th house and the 2nd house are examples of houses that are unfortunate and hard, but also very much necessary for life and can have positive meanings as well. The 12th house was actually considered to be the worst of the worst. It cannot be seen at all by the 1st, and it has the greater malefic Saturn rejoicing there. The ailments and sadness of the 6th house become long-term within the 12th house. And it creates senses of isolation and being entrapped in a much bigger way and perhaps in a more long-term way as well. Truly disconnecting us from the good spirit that is in the 11th house. 2 of these bad houses have malefics rejoicing in them. The other houses have nothing that rejoices in them. In fact, one of the books that I read, I believe it was Vettius Valens, mentioned that no planet can rejoice in the 8th house because it is such a barren, inactive wasteland. Now, despite that, I do want to say they can be more or less fortunate depending on certain placements. I will give you a few great examples of these. I also want to say having bad house placements does not mean someone is a bad person. As you can see, none of these meanings of these bad houses automatically make someone a bad person. The 2nd house is finances, livelihood, and possessions. The 6th is injuries and illness and work. The 8th is death, something we're all going to experience at some time or another. And the 12th is loss, sickness, enemies, and confinement. None of these inherently make someone a bad person. Even the meaning of enemies, which technically can be both 12th and 6th house, does not make someone a bad person. Just because someone has enemies doesn't mean that they're wrong. The other person could be in the wrong, though it's not really my place to judge in this fictional situation. So these just represent unfortunate areas of life that all of us experience. All of us have some kind of relationship with money and livelihood. And for some of us, it's a better relationship. But we know that for many of us, it can be hard. And it can indicate struggle and poverty. And ups and downs of fortune, even if it is good. And then the 6th house is injuries, illness, subordinates, and work. It is also secret enemies and also pets. So there's a little bit of positivity within the 6th house too. The 8th house is death, inheritances through death, and the money of others. It also represents fear and anxiety, and it can represent things like taxes, loans, due to that meaning of the money of others. The 12th house can represent loss, sickness, enemies, especially secret enemies, and confinement. I see the 12th house as both long-term illness, but also mental illness because of just that confinement and that isolation that comes from the 12th house. And my astrology teacher, Chris Brennan, did talk about how sometimes the 6th house relates to more physical injuries and ailments, while the 12th house can be a little bit more mental, and that is certainly how I see it myself. And we can even see that looking at the rejoicing planets, where the Mars tends to indicate things like cuts and burns and rashes, whereas Saturn can indicate long-term mental illness. So these are the areas of life that lack joy for many people, and it will not always be the case. Like if someone has a 10th house ruler in the 12th house and it's like well placed, that could actually be someone who works in mental health. If someone has a 2nd house, like really good planet, that can be someone who receives a lot of abundance. But these are things that take us away from life and joy, like sickness, loss, and the quest for money take us away from our soul. The 2nd house was considered to be the least bad of the bad, because it does support the 1st house, and it's just considered to be the lesser of the bads. It's kind of like a necessary evil, and it's a reminder that sometimes money can corrupt people, but also sometimes it's always necessary, and within the hands of the right person, it can be a good thing. The 3rd house was seen as unfortunate by some, but I personally do not see it that way. The moon is considered benefic by some and malefic by others, and it is also considered to be neither by some. So I suppose I understand the confusion, but the 3rd house does receive energy from the 1st at the end of the day. So I consider the 3rd to be a good house. Perhaps the least good of the good, might have a little less energy, just like the 9th, but I would still consider a good house. Now the thing is, modern astrology has chosen to ignore the bad houses, but ignoring the bad houses does not make them go away. Ignoring things like lack and poverty and illness and death does not make them go away. And in fact, they are the certainties in life. If there is ever a point in which we step into a utopia and no longer have to worry about these things, I may consider removing the good and bad houses from my astrology practice. But that does not seem to be anywhere ahead of us. As much as our society has improved, and really can't be compared to the Middle Ages and the Hellenistic period, we still struggle with matters of the bad houses. We still struggle with 12th house matters of being isolated from your community. We still struggle with second house matters of financial struggles. We still struggle with having to work our ass off in a 9 to 5 or even longer, working overtime that separates us from our soul and our family and our joy and our relationships. We still struggle from death. We're all still going to die. And even if they somehow make it so people don't die, you know it's only going to be the rich people there. So that just relates right back to the second house. We still struggle with matters of the bad houses as a society. And when we look at the astrology chart as this is my life, this is the world around me, this isn't only me, and me having a bad house placement doesn't mean I'm going to have a bad life. It means I might have a hard point in life. We begin using astrology to validate ourselves. Astrology is meant to validate your struggles and show you where to focus your energy on the good things. The other thing is, it is the balance of life that so many cultures and most people have accepted, that there is good and bad. There is easy and hard. There is fortune and misfortune. It is incredibly rare for me to look at a perfect astrology chart. I don't think I've seen one yet. And it is incredibly rare for someone to have a perfect life. And if I were to go into every astrology reading saying, your life is perfect, nothing to worry about, that person might feel better at first, but then when something goes wrong, they would think back and they'd be like, wait, but my astrology chart's good. Why am I struggling? Why is this hard? But when I tell someone, your astrology chart shows you being able to work hard and rise up from your struggles, that empowers them to do so. It tells them, I recognize you've had bad days, bad months, bad years. Here's the area of life that if you put your energy and effort into, you can see the most growth. Here's the time in life that your life is going to be able to turn around. That your sadness can be told by the stars, and that you are heard by the universe and the stars around you. That's the sense of comfort that I seek from astrology, not the stars gaslighting me and saying, you're fine, get over it. So it is balance, and I think the wonderful thing about recognizing the balance is that there's still more good than bad. There are only 4 bad/hard houses in any given chart. The rest of them are good. And so it can be hard to accept that there are bad houses, that there was considered to be good and bad. But in doing so, we accept that we have hard parts of life, and we remember that there is more good than bad at the end of the day. Now, I want to give you guys a few examples of what good placements in these houses can look like, because they do exist. So let's talk about some of these and how these houses can actually transform in the right circumstances. We're starting with Jupiter and Leo in the 12th house. I originally wanted to do Jupiter and Sagittarius in the 12th house, but then I realized I want to do it in Leo, and I want to show how even just slightly mitigated placements can be positive. So Jupiter has some triplicity rulership in any fire sign, including Leo. It is also above the horizon here, which it will prefer to be, and it is in a masculine/fire sign. So Jupiter being here is happier, and it is in the 12th house. It would also be the luckiest planet in this chart. So Jupiter in the 12th house in Leo can actually show someone who may go through experiences of confinement, but can learn to shine through that, who can take those experiences and teach others maybe, or who can actually help others who are feeling low and lift them up. And even if they might make enemies, they are going to be able to remain optimistic and strong through doing so. And that generally they are viewed as incredibly friendly and may not make very many enemies in the first place. So Jupiter here is really able to transform that 12th house into, we're not saying this person won't ever experience an isolation, but they can actually grow through it. And many people see the 12th house as something spiritual, and it is and it isn't. Like, it's the house of bad spirit, not good spirit, as modern astrologers call it. But bringing Jupiter there kind of transforms it a little bit to be a little bit more in that direction. Be a little bit more helpful and constructive. Now, Jupiter may be a little bit suppressed here. It can't do quite as much good as it could in, say, the 5th house over there, even the 4th house. But it still takes this harsh house and makes it a little more friendly. Mercury in Virgo in the 8th house, it also has Venus helping it out. So Mercury in Virgo in the 8th house with a slightly unhappy Venus doing its best to help can show that this placement becomes more about inheritances, more about banking. Like, this person could be an amazing investor. They could get surprising breaks from the bank. They could have a partner who is a banker or investor and loves to give them gifts. They could receive a lot of gifts from like women because of that Venus connection as well. So that Venus, the benefic planet there, working alongside Mercury, which is in its domicile and exaltation, shows someone actually being respected around 8th house matters. So they could be respected as an investor or respected as the partner of a big investor, and respected to the point that people are always showering them in gifts and they get money in unexpected places. Venus and Taurus in the 2nd house is a pretty classic example of how this house becomes more elevated and luxurious. While the 2nd house is usually the money that we need to survive, if we have Venus and Taurus there, it becomes receiving a lot of money and being able to treat ourselves and even treat others when we feel like it, but mostly to treat ourselves. This is someone who can spend money on luxury and who spends money on self-care and who attracts money, like someone who can make money through being a model, for example, through their own attraction, through art. They can make money, by kind of being a sugar baby sometimes, just literally making money for being themselves in some way. Or they could make money through the beauty industry, through hair, through something along those lines. So that's one way that the Venus in Taurus, like a well-placed Venus here, can start to transform the 2nd house into what modern astrology thinks it is, which is a house of luxury. And then we have a rejoicing Mars in Aries in the 6th house, conjunct with Jupiter and loosely conjunct with a not so happy Venus, but both of the benefics working together is still powerful. We also have the moon there, which will help Venus out a little too. So loaded house, but that rejoicing Mars will actually lift everything up. It is in a planet, it is in a sign that it rejoices in, and it is in rulership there. And so this could actually make someone a really great hard worker, and it could attract them good jobs, like jobs that they actually make money through. Like, this person might have a 9-to-5, but they actually love it, and they might even meet their partner through their job, and they might have experiences to travel because of the moon here. And sure, they may have some healing to do around it. Chiron's there too, but also there's just so much expansiveness and growth, and this person could even find themselves being a great leader through the workplace. So that's one way that this can show up. This could also be someone who would likely have no enemies, just everyone supporting them and wanting to see them thrive. But if they did have an enemy, you bet your ass they would win. This is someone who can be lucky in like martial affairs. Like, if anyone starts a physical fight with them, I would not worry about them, even if they're not trained. I just would not worry. Mars is taking care of them in this placement. Mars becomes a protector, and it turns the 6th house into one that's more about like strength and work and movement and the gains that we get from hard work, because we have Jupiter and the moon here and Venus. So we have luxury, playing around with abundance, playing around with the gains of fortune. And we have Mars there just supporting the action, the hard work that allows one to draw those things in. So I hope today's conversation helps you realize that yes, there are bad and unfortunate parts of life, and that is shown in astrology. But with the right chart, the right circumstances, the right life, the right person, these places can also be transformed into something really cool and magical. A bad house does not mean you're going to have a bad life. It can represent a hard area of your life, but everyone has bad houses. That's the other thing. Even if you don't have a placement there, you still have a ruling planet there. You still have a perfection year there. You still have that house, and I would still read it in an astrology reading. So if you think you lucked out by not having a 12th house placement, you didn't. We all have that area of life to overcome. For some people, it's just more relevant. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I'd love to talk more about this. I am not afraid of the bad house placements, and this is someone with a badly placed Mars in the 12th house, okay? So you don't need to be afraid either. Thank you. Bye.